In 1966, Nigeria was a young republic that had barely been 6 years into independence from British colonial rule. Beneath the surface of its newfound freedom, ethnic divisions festered. The political system, dominated by regional parties, reflected the fractured nature of the country. The Northern People's Congress, NPC, the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, and the Action Group, AG, each held sway in their respective regions, often prioritizing ethnic loyalties over national unity. The immediate trigger for the January 15th coup lay in the 1964 and 1965 elections, marred by widespread allegations of fraud and violence. Tensions escalated further with the crisis in the western region, where chaos reigned under the NPC-backed government. Nigeria's parliamentary system seemed to buckle under the weight of its divisions, and the people's hope for a united nation grew dim. The coup plotters were a group of idealistic young officers who believed the military could rescue Nigeria from political chaos. Led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu and Major Emmanuel Ifejuna, these officers were largely from the southern Igbo ethnic group, though their motivations extended beyond ethnicity. Their goal was straightforward yet ambitious: to rid the country of corrupt politicians and replace the existing government with one that would prioritize national unity and progress. They saw themselves as saviors, tasked with delivering Nigeria from the brink of collapse. Weeks of clandestine planning culminated in the final meeting on the night of January 14, 1966. The conspirators agreed on a synchronized attack across key cities, Lagos, Kaduna, and Ibadan. They would target political leaders, military commanders, and anyone else deemed a threat to their vision of a better Nigeria. The federal capital, Lagos, was the epicenter of the coup's planning and execution. Major Emmanuel Ifejuna, one of the chief architects of the plot, led a detachment of soldiers to the Prime Minister's official residence. The rain muted their footsteps as they surrounded the modest compound. The soldiers burst through the doors, shouting orders. Balewa, startled but composed, emerged from his quarters in his flowing agbada, asking, "What is the meaning of this?" The men offered no explanation as they roughly bound his hands and led him into the rain-soaked night. His calm demeanor belied the storm raging in his heart. Balewa's fate would remain a mystery for days. His body was later discovered in a shallow grave near Lagos, a tragic symbol of the coup's brutal resolve. Known for his flamboyant dress sense and larger-than-life personality, Chief Festus Okatiibo was another high-profile target. His critics accused him of corruption and living extravagantly, while many Nigerians languished in poverty. When soldiers arrived at his residence, Okatiibo refused to go quietly. He berated his captors, questioning their motives. "Why me? What have I done wrong?" he reportedly shouted as they dragged him into the rain. Okatiibo's death was particularly gruesome. He was shot multiple times and his body discarded along a roadside, a stark reminder of the coup's ruthlessness. Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu, the charismatic and idealistic leader of the coup, led the assault in Kaduna. Nzeogwu's men, armed with automatic rifles, stormed Bello's compound. The Sardauna's guards fought valiantly but were quickly overwhelmed. The soldiers breached the house and found Bello with his wife. Despite their pleas for mercy, both were executed in cold blood. Bello's body was riddled with bullets, and the coup plotters burned parts of his residence as they retreated. The northern region was thrown into chaos. Bello's assassination enraged the northern elites, who viewed the coup as an Igbo-led conspiracy against their people. Unlike Balewa or Bello, Akintola refused to go down without a fight. Awakened by the commotion, he armed himself with a pistol and took cover behind a piece of furniture. As the soldiers entered his home, he fired several shots, reportedly wounding one of the attackers. "Leave me alone!" Akintola shouted as he continued to resist. His defiance was short-lived. Overwhelmed by the superior firepower of the soldiers, he was eventually shot dead. Akintola's death marked the coup's bloody conclusion in the western region. By the morning of January 15th, the entire nation was in shock. The coup plotters, who believed they had executed a swift and decisive operation, faced unexpected challenges. The military was not as unified as they had hoped, and their lack of widespread support left them vulnerable. The news of Ahmadu Bello's assassination sent shockwaves through the northern region. Bello was not just a political leader, he was a revered figure, considered the cultural and spiritual anchor of the North. His death, along with the perceived targeting of other northern leaders, fueled suspicion that the coup was an ethnic conspiracy orchestrated by the predominantly Igbo officers. In Kaduna, Major Kaduna Nzeogwu, the charismatic face of the coup, tried to calm the situation. He delivered a speech over the radio, declaring, "This is not an ethnic or tribal coup. We have taken over to save Nigeria from corruption, nepotism, and decay." Despite his words, the damage was done. Mistrust spread rapidly, and whispers of retaliation began to surface. Aguiyi Ironsi was not part of the coup, but found himself thrust into a position of immense power. Recognizing the lack of coordination among the coup plotters, he quickly mobilized loyal troops to suppress the rebellion in Lagos. By January 16th, the coup had largely collapsed in the capital. The plotters, including Major Ifejuna and Major Ademoyaga, were arrested. Nzeogwu, however, remained in control of Kaduna, where his forces had successfully executed the coup. It took intense negotiations for Nzeogwu to surrender to Aguiyi Ironsi, who promised fair treatment. The coup plotters were court-martialed, but their fates varied. Major Kaduna Nzeogwu, admired even by his adversaries for his discipline and charisma, was detained but not executed. He would later die in combat during the Nigerian Civil War in 1967, fighting for Biafra. Major Emmanuel Ifejuna, on the other hand, faced a grimmer end. After a failed rebellion during the Civil War, he was executed by firing squad in 1967. His role in the 1966 coup, particularly his betrayal of some fellow plotters, left his legacy mired in controversy. Aguiyi Ironsi assumed power as Nigeria's first military head of state. His administration sought to stabilize the country, but his decisions exacerbated tensions. One of his most controversial actions was the Unification Decree, which abolished the federal structure and centralized power in Lagos. Northern leaders, already suspicious of Igbo dominance, viewed this as an attempt to consolidate Igbo control over the nation. The animosity culminated in the July 1966 counter-coup, during which Aguiyi Ironsi was captured and executed by northern officers. His death marked the start of a new chapter in Nigeria's troubled history. The first coup in Nigeria's history left an indelible mark. It exposed the fragility of Nigeria's unity and set a precedent for military intervention in politics. Over the next 3 decades, coups would become a recurring theme, each one further eroding trust in Nigeria's democratic institutions. The ethnic and regional divisions inflamed by the coup contributed to the Nigerian Civil War, which started in 1967 and ended in 1970, a conflict that claimed over 1 million lives. For many, the events of January 15, 1966, remain a tragic turning point, a night when idealism turned to bloodshed, and the dream of a united Nigeria seemed more elusive than ever. The coup plotters believed they were rescuing Nigeria, but their actions deepened its wounds. Today, their story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of power struggles and the importance of fostering unity in diversity. As Nigeria continues to navigate its complex history, the lessons of January 15, 1966, remain ever relevant. By mid-1966, Nigeria was a nation teetering on the edge. The January 15th coup, led predominantly by Igbo officers, had left deep scars. The assassination of key northern leaders, including Prime Minister Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa and Northern Premier Sir Ahmadu Bello, was perceived as a deliberate attack on northern dominance. Though Major General Johnson Agui Ironsi, an Igbo officer, had taken control and sought to stabilize the nation, his policies only heightened tensions. The most contentious of these was the Unification Decree, Decree No. 34, which abolished Nigeria's federal structure in favor of a unitary system. Northerners viewed this move as a direct threat to their autonomy, fueling suspicions of Igbo hegemony. The seeds of the counter-coup were sown in barracks across northern Nigeria. Young northern officers, still grieving the loss of their leaders in January, harbored deep resentment toward the Igbo-dominated government. They felt humiliated and marginalized, convinced that Ironsi's regime would solidify Igbo control over the country. The plot began to take shape under the leadership of officers like Lieutenant Colonel Murtala Mohammed, Major Martin Adamu, and Lieutenant Theophilus Danjuma. These men, driven by a mix of personal loss and regional loyalty, believed it was their duty to avenge the January killings and restore northern dominance. On the evening of July 28, 1966, Major General Ironsi traveled to Ibadan to meet with Western region leaders. He was accompanied by his host, Lieutenant Colonel Adekun Fajuyi, the military governor of the Western region. The meeting was meant to ease tensions, but it would become the stage for his final hours. Simultaneously, in Kaduna, the coup plotters prepared to strike. They coordinated their plans with officers stationed in Lagos, ensuring the rebellion would unfold simultaneously in key locations. The coup began in the early hours of July 29, 1966. Northern soldiers in Kaduna overpowered their Igbo colleagues, executing many of them in their sleep. The violence was swift and brutal, sparing no one suspected of loyalty to Ironsi's regime. In Lagos, chaos erupted as soldiers seized key installations. Igbo officers were hunted down and killed, their bodies often mutilated in acts of vengeance. By dawn on July 29, Ironsi and Fajuyi were taken captive by mutinous soldiers led by Lieutenant Danjuma. Despite his position as head of state, Ironsi was powerless against the armed men who stormed his residence. The soldiers demanded answers about the January coup, accusing Ironsi of complicity in the killings of northern leaders. When he refused to speak, they tortured and executed him. Colonel Fajuyi, loyal to Ironsi to the end, chose to die alongside him rather than abandon his guest. The counter-coup effectively ended Ironsi's short-lived regime. The mutineers installed Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, a young northern officer, as head of state. Gowon, known for his calm demeanor and diplomatic skills, was seen as a unifying figure who could bridge the widening regional divide. However, the violence did not stop with Ironsi's death. Throughout the north, Igbo civilians were targeted in brutal pogroms. Thousands were killed, and many more fled to the eastern region, setting the stage for the secessionist movement that would culminate in the Nigerian Civil War that lasted for 3 years. The July 29, 1966, counter-coup was not just a military rebellion, it was a turning point in Nigeria's history. It deepened ethnic divisions, eroded trust in the military as a neutral institution, and paved the way for the civil war that would claim over 1 million lives. For the northern officers who orchestrated the coup, it was seen as justice served, a retribution for the January killings. For the Igbo, it was a betrayal that shattered the fragile unity of the nation. The counter-coup of July 29, 1966, was both an act of vengeance and a desperate bid to restore balance in a fractured Nigeria. While it succeeded in removing Ironsi and installing Gowon, it failed to heal the nation's wounds. Instead, it left a legacy of mistrust and bloodshed that would haunt Nigeria for decades to come. By 1975, General Yakubu Gowon had ruled Nigeria for 9 years, longer than anyone had anticipated when he assumed power during the counter-coup of 1966. Initially celebrated as a unifier who guided Nigeria through the horrors of the civil war, Gowon's popularity had steadily waned. The oil boom of the early 1970s had brought immense wealth, but corruption, mismanagement, and a lack of infrastructure left ordinary Nigerians disillusioned. Promises of a return to civilian rule in 1974 were postponed indefinitely, sparking outrage among politicians, students, and even military officers. Many felt that Gowon, surrounded by a clique of advisors and sycophants, had lost touch with the people. Within the military, discontent brewed among younger officers. They felt sidelined by Gowon's inner circle of senior commanders, many of whom were seen as corrupt and ineffective. Prominent among these disillusioned officers was Colonel Joseph Nanvan Garba, a trusted commander of the Brigade of Guards and a confidant of many reform-minded officers. Conversations about a change in leadership began to take shape in late 1974. The plotters, careful to avoid suspicion, held clandestine meetings in various locations, meticulously planning their move. Their goal was clear: to oust Gowon peacefully and install a leader who would prioritize accountability and the long-promised transition to civilian rule. On July 29, 1975, Gowon was attending the OAU summit in Kampala. The coup plotters saw his absence as the perfect opportunity to strike. Colonel Garba, leveraging his position as commander of the Brigade of Guards, coordinated the takeover of key government and military installations in Lagos. The coup was executed with surgical precision. Soldiers loyal to the plotters seized the national radio station, army headquarters, and other critical infrastructure. By dawn, the city was under their control. At 6 a.m., Colonel Garba addressed the nation via radio. Fellow Nigerians, after careful consideration of the political and economic situation in the country, we have decided to change the leadership of this nation. The announcement was calm but resolute, signaling the end of Gowon's regime without a single shot fired. The coup was met with mixed reactions. Many Nigerians, weary of corruption and stagnation, welcomed the change. Others, particularly Gowon's allies, were shocked by the sudden turn of events. In Kampala, Gowon received the news with stoic resignation. Though initially reluctant to step down, he realized that returning to Nigeria could spark violence. He chose exile, eventually settling in the United Kingdom, where he would live for several years. The coup plotters installed Brigadier Murtala Ramat Mohammed as the new leader, with Brigadier Olusegun Obasanjo as his deputy. Murtala Mohammed's reputation preceded him. He was known as a disciplined, no-nonsense officer with a deep disdain for corruption. Murtala Mohammed wasted no time in implementing sweeping reforms. 1. Civil service purge. Thousands of civil servants were dismissed for corruption or inefficiency. 2. Return to civilian rule. A detailed timeline was announced, setting the stage for democratic elections by 1979. 3. Administrative reforms. Mohammed restructured the federal government, creating new states to balance regional power dynamics. 4. Infrastructure and development. Plans to reinvest oil revenues into national development projects were unveiled, signaling a new era of accountability. In exile, Gowon lived a quiet life. He pursued academic studies, eventually earning a doctorate in political science. Though he was barred from returning to Nigeria for years, his legacy remained a topic of debate. Some praised his role in preserving Nigeria's unity during the Civil War, while others criticized his complacency and failure to address corruption. The overthrow of General Yakubu Gowon marked a turning point in Nigeria's history. It ended nearly a decade of military stagnation and ushered in a period of reform under Murtala Mohammed. While Gowon's fall was peaceful, the coup highlighted the fragile balance of power in Nigeria and the growing impatience for accountable leadership. The coup of July 29, 1975, was a rare moment of bloodless transition in Nigeria's turbulent political history. It demonstrated the power of collective action within the military to effect change, though it also set a precedent for future interventions. For many Nigerians, it was a moment of renewed hope, a chance to rebuild a nation scarred by war and mismanagement. Murtala Mohammed came to power on July 29, 1975, after the bloodless overthrow of General Yakubu Gowon. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor and bold reforms, Mohammed quickly became a symbol of change. He launched an aggressive anti-corruption drive, purged the civil service, and announced plans to return Nigeria to civilian rule by 1979. Yet, his swift and uncompromising approach earned him enemies. Within months, discontent simmered among those who felt marginalized by his policies. The seeds of rebellion were sown, and by February 1976, they bore deadly fruit. The coup was masterminded by Lieutenant Colonel Bukar Saka Dimka, a northern officer with grievances against Murtala's regime. Dimka and his co-conspirators believed Mohammed's reforms were too radical, disrupting the status quo and threatening their interests. They viewed him as a dictator who had to be removed. The conspirators, a mix of military officers and civilians, planned to assassinate Murtala and take control of the government. Their strategy centered on a coordinated attack in Lagos, targeting the head of state and other key officials. Murtala Mohammed was a man of routine. On that Friday morning, he left his residence in Ikoyi and traveled to Dodan Barracks, the seat of government, without the usual heavy security convoy. His confidence in his leadership and popularity made him dismissive of potential threats. As his car approached a junction near the Federal Secretariat in Ikoyi, the assassin struck Murtala and his aide-de-camp, Lieutenant Akintunde Kinsahinwa, were killed instantly. The attackers fled the scene, leaving the nation in shock. News of Murtala's death spread rapidly, plunging the nation into confusion. The conspirators attempted to seize control of key installations, including the radio station, from which Lieutenant Colonel Dimka broadcast a coup declaration. Dimka's speech was disjointed and failed to inspire confidence. He criticized Murtala's government and claimed the coup was necessary to restore order. However, his message lacked clarity and support, revealing the coup's poor planning. The response to the coup was swift and decisive. Loyalist forces, led by Major General Theophilus Danjuma, quickly mobilized to suppress the rebellion. Within hours, key installations were secured, and Dimka's men were either captured or fled. The coup, poorly coordinated and lacking widespread support, collapsed almost as quickly as it began. Dimka, realizing the coup's failure, went into hiding. However, he was eventually captured after a nationwide manhunt. The captured conspirators, including Dimka, were tried by a military tribunal. Evidence revealed the extent of their plot and the individuals involved. Dimka's testimony implicated several high-ranking officials and civilians, though many denied involvement. The tribunal sentenced Dimka and several others to death. On May 15, 1976, Dimka and his co-conspirators were executed by firing squad, marking the end of the coup attempt. Murtala Mohammed's death was a turning point in Nigeria's history. Though his rule lasted only 200 days, his impact was profound. He was remembered as a leader who prioritized national unity, accountability, and a clear path to civilian governance. His deputy, Brigadier Olusegun Obasanjo, assumed leadership and continued Murtala's policies, ensuring the transition to civilian rule in 1979. Murtala's assassination, though tragic, became a rallying point for reform and resilience in Nigeria. The attempted coup of February 13, 1976, and the assassination of General Murtala Mohammed highlighted the fragility of power in a deeply divided nation. While the conspirators sought to derail progress, their actions instead galvanized Nigeria's commitment to reform. Murtala's legacy endures, a testament to his vision of a united and prosperous Nigeria. By 1983, Nigeria's Second Republic was in crisis. The government, led by President Shagari, had failed to deliver on its promises of economic growth and national stability. Corruption was endemic, and the nation's wealth from the oil boom of the 1970s was squandered on vanity projects and personal enrichment. Inflation soared, unemployment worsened, and basic amenities became luxuries. The 1983 general elections, marred by widespread allegations of rigging and violence, shattered whatever trust the populace had in Shagari's administration. Opposition parties accused the ruling National Party of Nigeria, NPN, of manipulating results to retain power. The political landscape was volatile, and the military watched with growing disdain as chaos engulfed the civilian government. In military circles, frustration had reached a boiling point. Many officers believed that civilian rule had become synonymous with incompetence and corruption. Among them was Major General Muhammadu Buhari, a no-nonsense disciplinarian who had built a reputation for integrity. The planning for the coup began in late 1983, spearheaded by a group of senior officers who saw themselves as saviors of a nation in decline. Their grievances included: 1. Economic mismanagement. The oil-dependent economy was crumbling under Shagari's leadership. 2. Corruption. High-ranking officials were accused of embezzling public funds. 3. Electoral malpractice. The fraudulent elections eroded faith in the democratic process. 4. Security concerns. Ethnic and regional tensions were on the rise, threatening national unity. The conspirators believed that military intervention was the only way to restore order. They planned meticulously, ensuring that key installations in Lagos and other major cities were secured. The coup began late on the night of December 30th. Military units loyal to the plotters took positions around Lagos, targeting strategic locations such as the radio station, the airport, and the presidential villa. The plan was executed with precision, ensuring minimal resistance. Unlike many coups in Nigeria's history, Shagari's removal was bloodless. He was placed under house arrest at a presidential lodge in Sokoto. However, his vice president, Alex Ekwim, and several key government officials were detained and transported to military facilities in Lagos. Shagari's calm demeanor during the coup contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding in other parts of the country. The announcement, delivered by Brigadier Sonny Abacha, outlined the reasons for the coup. Abacha accused the civilian government of corruption, incompetence, and failing to protect the interests of Nigerians. He promised that the military would restore order and prioritize the welfare of the people. The coup plotters installed Buhari as the new head of state. His deputy, Major General Tunde Idiagbon, was equally committed to the military's vision of restoring discipline and eradicating corruption. Buhari's regime declared a nationwide crackdown on corruption, launching investigations into former government officials. Many politicians, including Shagari and Ekwim, were detained and faced tribunals. While Shagari was eventually cleared of corruption charges, Ekwim and several others were not as fortunate. Buhari's government implemented sweeping reforms, including 1. War against indiscipline, WAI, a nationwide campaign to instill discipline and order among Nigerians. 2. Crackdown on corruption. The regime investigated and prosecuted numerous officials from the Shagari administration. 3. Economic reforms. Strict austerity measures were introduced to stabilize the economy, though they often led to public hardship. While some applauded these efforts, others criticized the regime's authoritarian tendencies, including the suppression of press freedoms and the detention of political dissidents without trial. The coup of December 31, 1983, marked the end of Nigeria's Second Republic and the beginning of another era of military rule. For Shagari, it was a humbling conclusion to a presidency that began with hope but ended in disarray. He remained a respected elder statesman until his death in 2018, often reflecting on the challenges of governance in a divided nation. The public reaction to the coup was mixed. While many were relieved to see the end of Shagari's administration, others feared the return of military rule. Buhari's regime, though initially welcomed, would soon face backlash for its harsh policies and human rights abuses. The overthrow of the Second Republic on December 31, 1983, was a reflection of Nigeria's political instability and the challenges of building a sustainable democracy. While the coup temporarily addressed issues of corruption and mismanagement, it deepened the military's grip on power and delayed the nation's democratic progress. By 1985, Major General Muhammadu Buhari's regime had ruled Nigeria for nearly 20 months. Buhari and his deputy, Major General Tunde Idiagbon, had implemented the War Against Indiscipline (WAI) campaign, aimed at restoring order and combating corruption. While some Nigerians admired their strict policies, others grew resentful of the regime's authoritarianism. The government imposed harsh austerity measures, which, coupled with the detention of political opponents and suppression of press freedoms, alienated many Nigerians, including influential figures within the military. Within the military, dissatisfaction was brewing. Buhari's regime, while anti-corruption in principle, was criticized for favoring northern officers and sidelining others, especially from the Middle Belt and southern regions. The rigid governance style of Major General Tunde Idiagbon, who effectively ran day-to-day operations, further alienated military officers. Among those dissatisfied was Major General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, IBB, the Chief of Army Staff. Charismatic and politically astute, Babangida had once been a close ally of Buhari. However, he grew increasingly critical of the regime's inability to address Nigeria's economic woes and its lack of inclusivity in decision-making. The coup plot began to take shape in early 1985. Babangida and his co-conspirators, including Colonel Anthony Ukpo and Major Sambo Dasuki, were meticulous in their planning. They leveraged their positions within the military to ensure loyalty from key units. Unlike Buhari's rise to power, which relied on strict discipline, Babangida's approach was more strategic, emphasizing negotiation and persuasion. The coup unfolded in the early hours of August 27, 1985. Babangida's loyalists took control of key installations in Lagos, including Dodon Barracks, the seat of government. Resistance was minimal, as many within the military had grown disillusioned with Buhari's regime. At Dodon Barracks, Buhari was placed under house arrest. The absence of his key ally, especially Major General Tunde Idiagbon, who was in Saudi Arabia on pilgrimage during the coup, weakened Buhari's position further, ensuring a smooth transition of power. By dawn, Babangida addressed the nation in a televised broadcast. Fellow Nigerians, it has become clear that the present leadership cannot meet the aspirations of the people. We have taken this step to bring about a more inclusive and responsive government. Babangida emphasized his intention to implement policies that would improve the economy, address corruption, and foster unity. Unlike Buhari, who focused on discipline and austerity, Babangida promised a more flexible and pragmatic approach to governance. Buhari was detained for nearly 3 years following the coup. During his confinement, he reportedly maintained a sense of calm and dignity, despite the abrupt end to his rule. He later reflected on the betrayal by officers he once trusted, including Babangida. Tunde Idiagbon, upon his return from Saudi Arabia, was also detained. His absence during the coup was seen as a significant factor in the regime's collapse, as he had been the architect of many of Buhari's policies. Babangida's regime began with promises of reform. Among his early initiatives were 1. Economic policies. He introduced the Structural Adjustment Program, SAP, which aimed to stabilize Nigeria's economy through currency devaluation, privatization, and deregulation. While intended to address long-standing economic issues, SAP sparked widespread hardship among ordinary Nigerians. 2. Political transition. Babangida announced plans to return Nigeria to civilian rule, a pledge that would later become a source of controversy. 3. Public engagement. Unlike Buhari, who ruled with an iron fist, Babangida sought to portray himself as a man of the people, frequently engaging with the media and public. The coup of August 27, 1985, was largely bloodless and initially welcomed by many Nigerians who had grown weary of Buhari's authoritarian rule. However, Babangida's promises of reform would soon face scrutiny, as his policies led to significant economic challenges and political instability in the years to come. The overthrow of Major General Muhammadu Buhari on August 27, 1985, marked a turning point in Nigeria's history. It highlighted the fragility of military alliances and the ever-present ambition for power within the armed forces. While Babangida's regime began with optimism, it would eventually face its own controversies, leaving Nigerians to navigate the complexities of yet another chapter in their turbulent political journey. By 1990, Nigeria was in turmoil. Under General Ibrahim Babangida, IBB, the nation faced growing economic hardship due to the controversial Structural Adjustment Program, SAP. While Babangida's regime promised economic reform and a gradual return to civilian rule, his policies deepened poverty and widened inequality. Corruption and favoritism in the military further alienated younger officers, many of whom saw the leadership as self-serving and disconnected from the struggles of ordinary Nigerians. Ethnic tensions also simmered beneath the surface, exacerbated by perceptions of northern dominance in the political and military spheres. The coup was led by Major Gideon Orka, a middle-ranking officer from the Middle Belt. Orka and his co-conspirators, including Captain Peribo Dikolo and Lieutenant Cyril Ozoela, were motivated by a mix of personal grievances, political ideals, and regional frustrations. Their manifesto condemned Babangida's administration for corruption, economic mismanagement, and favoritism toward the northern elite. Uniquely, the plotters proposed the excision of 5 northern states, Kano, Katsina, Borno, Bauchi, and Sokoto, from Nigeria, citing the dominance of the northern oligarchy as a fundamental problem. At precisely 4 a.m., Orka and his men launched their coup. Their primary targets were Dodan Barracks, the seat of government, and key military installations in Lagos. The plotters sought to capture Babangida and eliminate loyalist forces. The first assault on Dodan Barracks was brutal. Soldiers exchanged heavy gunfire, and explosions rocked the compound. While some officers were caught off guard, Babangida narrowly escaped through a back route, reportedly disguised in civilian clothes. At dawn, Orka addressed the nation via a radio broadcast. In a fiery speech, he declared Babangida's government overthrown and outlined the manifesto of the coup plotters. His announcement included the controversial proposal to excise northern states, which he argued were a source of Nigeria's political and economic problems. Orka's broadcast shocked the nation, but it also alienated many Nigerians, particularly those from the north. His call for the excision of northern states was seen as a direct attack on national unity and drew widespread condemnation. Babangida's loyalists, led by senior officers, quickly regrouped. Reinforcements were called in from military units stationed outside Lagos, and a counterattack was launched to retake Dodan Barracks and other key installations. The fighting was intense, with heavy casualties on both sides. By the afternoon, loyalist forces had overwhelmed the coup plotters. Orka and his men were captured, and the coup was effectively crushed. The captured plotters were subjected to a swift military trial. Orka remained defiant throughout the proceedings, insisting that his actions were motivated by a desire to save Nigeria from corruption and regional oppression. The tribunal sentenced Orka and 41 others to death by firing squad. Their executions were carried out shortly after the verdict, sending a clear message to potential dissenters. The failed coup left Nigeria deeply shaken. While many condemned Orka's attempt to overthrow the government, others sympathized with his critique of Babangida's regime. The controversial call to excise northern states heightened ethnic and regional tensions, further dividing the nation. For Babangida, the coup was a wake-up call. Though he survived, his grip on power was weakened, and his administration faced increased scrutiny and opposition in the years that followed. The Orka coup remains one of the most audacious and controversial attempts to overthrow a Nigerian government. It exposed the deep fractures within the nation, economic inequality, ethnic tensions, and disillusionment with leadership. While Orka's methods were widely criticized, his manifesto highlighted issues that continue to resonate in Nigeria's political discourse. The coup attempt of April 22, 1990, was both a bold gamble and a divisive act. For some, Orka was a misguided rebel who threatened Nigeria's unity. For others, he was a patriot who sought to challenge a corrupt and oppressive regime. Regardless of perspective, his actions left an indelible mark on Nigeria's history, serving as a reminder of the enduring struggle for justice and equity in a deeply divided nation. Nigeria in 1993 was a nation reeling from betrayal. Earlier that year, General Ibrahim Babangida, IBB, annulled the June 12 presidential election, widely regarded as the freest and fairest in the country's history. The presumed winner, Chief Moshood Kashimawo Olawale, MKO Abiola, was denied his mandate. Public outrage and protests engulfed the nation. Amid growing unrest, Babangida was forced to step aside on August 26, 1993, handing over power to an interim national government, ING, led by Chief Ernest Shonkan, a businessman with no political base or significant public support. The ING was meant to calm tensions and transition Nigeria to full civilian rule, but from its inception, it was a government on borrowed time. The ING faced insurmountable challenges. 1. Economic decline. Nigeria was in the throes of a severe economic crisis. Inflation was rampant, and the naira had plummeted in value. The Structural Adjustment Program, SAP, introduced during Babangida's rule, had left the economy in tatters. 2. Public outrage. The annulment of the June 12 election remained a festering wound. Protests and strikes, led by labor unions and civil rights groups, paralyzed the country. 3. Military distrust. The military, still wielding significant power, viewed Shonkan as weak and incapable of leading the nation. Amid this chaos, General Sani Abacha, then the Minister of Defense and a key player in the military hierarchy, quietly consolidated his influence. Abacha, a calculating and ambitious figure, had no intention of allowing the ING to continue. He and his allies in the military viewed the interim government as ineffective and incapable of addressing Nigeria's deepening crises. Behind the scenes, they plotted to remove Chief Ernest Shonkan and return the country to military rule. The coup required minimal planning. Shonkan, already isolated and unpopular, had little support within the government or the military. Abacha's strategy was simple: force Shonkan to resign and take over without bloodshed. On the morning of November 17, 1993, Shonkan was summoned to meet with Abacha and other senior military officers. In a terse and direct conversation, Abacha informed Shonkan that the military no longer supported the ING. Faced with no viable alternatives and unwilling to provoke a confrontation, Shonkan tendered his resignation. By noon, Abacha addressed the nation in a televised broadcast. He declared that the ING had been dissolved and announced himself as the new head of state. In his speech, Abacha cited the need to restore stability, rebuild the economy, and unify the nation as his reasons for taking over. Abacha wasted no time consolidating power. He dissolved all democratic institutions, including the National Assembly and state governments. Military administrators were appointed to govern the states, and a new Provisional Ruling Council, PRC, was established to oversee national affairs. The response to Abacha's takeover was polarized. While some Nigerians welcomed the end of Shonekan's ineffective government, others feared the return of a hardline military regime. Activists and pro-democracy groups, already mobilized by the June 12 crisis, intensified their calls for the restoration of democracy. Labor unions, led by the Nigeria Labour Congress (NLC) and National Democratic Coalition (NDECO), organized strikes and protests, demanding the release of MKO Abiola and the recognition of the June 12 mandate. After his resignation, Shonekan retreated from the political scene. He returned to his career as a businessman and legal expert, maintaining a low profile for the remainder of his life. While his tenure was brief and largely ineffective, Shonekan is remembered as a transitional figure during one of Nigeria's most turbulent periods. The overthrow of the ING marked the beginning of General Sani Abacha's regime, one of the most authoritarian and controversial in Nigeria's history. Under Abacha, Nigeria experienced 1. Repression. Abacha's regime was characterized by widespread human rights abuses, including the detention and execution of political opponents. 2. Corruption. Abacha and his associates looted billions of dollars from Nigeria's treasury, leaving a legacy of economic mismanagement. 3. Pro-democracy struggles. The period saw intensified efforts by civil society to restore democracy, culminating in Abacha's death in 1998. For many Nigerians, November 17, 1993, was a turning point that deepened the nation's struggle for democratic governance. The overthrow of the interim national government was a stark reminder of the fragility of democracy in Nigeria during the 1990s. While the ING was never meant to be a long-term solution, its abrupt end underscored the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian rule. Abacha's rise to power would plunge Nigeria into a darker chapter, but it also galvanized the pro-democracy movement, setting the stage for the eventual return to civilian governance in 1999. By late 1997, General Sani Abacha had ruled Nigeria with an iron fist for nearly 4 years. His regime was characterized by widespread corruption, human rights abuses, and repression. While Abacha maintained a facade of control, his government was rife with paranoia, fueled by rumors of dissent within the military and civilian populations. The alleged coup plot of December 21, 1997, was the culmination of this atmosphere of fear. It was a dramatic event that shook Nigeria and revealed the deep fractures within Abacha's regime. Though Abacha ruled with an iron grip, opposition to his regime simmered beneath the surface. The military, once the bedrock of his power, had grown restless. Many officers were disillusioned by the corruption and favoritism within the government. The public, meanwhile, endured worsening economic conditions and suppression of basic freedoms. Among the discontented was Lieutenant General Oladipo Dia, Abacha's deputy and chief of general staff. Dia, a Yoruba officer, had been a key figure in Abacha's administration but was suspected of harboring ambitions to overthrow him. These suspicions would form the basis of the alleged coup plot. In December 1997, Abacha's security apparatus claimed to have uncovered a coup plot involving Dia and several senior officers, including Major General Tajuddin Olanrewaju, Major General Abdul Karim Adisa, and others. The plot, they alleged, aimed to assassinate Abacha and seize control of the government. The details of the plot were murky, with much of the evidence coming from coerced confessions and intercepted communications. Some believed the coup was real, driven by genuine discontent among the officers. Others argued that it was a fabricated scheme by Abacha to eliminate perceived threats and consolidate power. Over the following days, Dia and the other accused plotters were arrested and subjected to intense interrogations. Reports later emerged that confessions were extracted under duress, with some officers enduring physical and psychological torture. One of the most dramatic moments came when a videotape of Dia's confession was released to the public. In the footage, Dia tearfully begged for Abacha's forgiveness, a scene that many interpreted as evidence of coercion. The alleged plotters were tried by a military tribunal, a process widely criticized for its lack of transparency and fairness. Dia and his co-accused were charged with treason and conspiracy to overthrow the government. Throughout the trial, the defense argued that the charges were fabricated and that the accused were victims of a political purge. However, the tribunal, controlled by Abacha loyalists, handed down severe sentences. Dia and several others were sentenced to death, while others received long prison terms. The trial and sentences sent shockwaves through Nigeria. While some believed the allegations of a coup, many viewed the trial as a show orchestrated by Abacha to eliminate rivals. International human rights organizations condemned the proceedings, calling for fair treatment of the accused. Following the alleged coup, Abacha moved quickly to consolidate power. He purged the military of suspected dissenters and tightened his control over the government. The event deepened a culture of fear that defined his regime, silencing potential opposition within the armed forces. Before the sentences could be carried out, Abacha's unexpected death on June 8, 1998, changed the course of events. His successor, General Abdul Salami Abubakar, commuted the death sentences and released many political prisoners, including Dia. The 1997 alleged coup plot remains one of the most controversial events of Abacha's regime. For many, it epitomized the paranoia and brutality of his rule. The lack of transparency and allegations of coerced confessions have led historians to question whether a coup was ever truly planned or if it was a fabricated pretext for political purges. The alleged coup plot of December 21, 1997, was both a turning point and a reflection of Abacha's regime. It underscored the dangers of absolute power, where paranoia and repression overshadow governance. While Abacha sought to secure his rule, the event instead deepened his isolation and further alienated the Nigerian people. For the accused, it was a harrowing chapter in their lives, one that highlighted both the fragility of power and the resilience of the human spirit. By 2003, Olusegun Obasanjo, Nigeria's first democratically elected president after years of military rule, had completed his first term and was campaigning for re-election. Obasanjo's return to power in 1999 symbolized Nigeria's transition to democracy after decades of coups and authoritarian regimes. However, the transition was not without challenges. The military, accustomed to wielding political power, struggled to adapt to its new subordinate role. Some officers harbored grievances, and rumors of discontent within the ranks began to surface. Obasanjo's government faced criticism for its economic reforms, perceived favoritism in appointments, and allegations of corruption. These issues, coupled with internal party disputes and the military's reduced influence, created a volatile political environment. Among the military, a faction of officers viewed Obasanjo's administration as failing to address Nigeria's security challenges and economic disparities. These frustrations laid the groundwork for the alleged 2003 coup plot. In early 2003, Nigerian intelligence agencies reportedly uncovered a conspiracy involving a group of military officers and civilians plotting to overthrow the government. The alleged conspirators were accused of planning to destabilize the country and forcefully seize power. At the center of the allegations were Major General Mohammed Buba Marwa, a former governor and respected military officer. While details of the plot remained vague, reports suggested that the conspirators intended to exploit public dissatisfaction to justify their actions. On March 10, 2003, security forces launched a series of coordinated operations to apprehend the alleged plotters. Among those arrested were high-ranking military officers and civilians. The operation was swift, designed to prevent the alleged conspiracy from gaining traction. The alleged coup plotters were tried before a military tribunal. The government accused them of plotting to overthrow a democratically elected government, a charge that carried severe penalties. However, the trial was shrouded in controversy, with critics arguing that the evidence presented was circumstantial and lacked credibility. Major General Marwa, the most prominent figure among the accused, denied involvement, insisting that the charges were politically motivated. Many Nigerians were skeptical of the government's narrative, questioning whether the coup plot was genuine or a pretext to neutralize perceived threats to Obasanjo's administration. The alleged coup plot sparked widespread debate across Nigeria. While some believed the plot was real, others viewed it as a fabricated story to target political rivals and dissenting voices within the military. International observers expressed concerns about the lack of transparency in the trial, urging the Nigerian government to ensure due process. The accused officers were eventually released after the government dropped charges against them, citing insufficient evidence. For many, this outcome reinforced suspicions that the alleged coup was more of a political maneuver than a genuine threat. Marwa, who maintained his innocence throughout, later re-entered public life, becoming an influential figure in Nigeria's political and security landscape. The 2003 alleged coup plot highlighted the lingering tensions between Nigeria's military and its nascent democracy. It underscored the challenges of transitioning from decades of military rule to a stable civilian government. While the plot did not materialize, it served as a reminder of the delicate balance between civil authority and military influence. The alleged coup plot of 2003 was a critical moment in Nigeria's democratic journey. It tested the resilience of the country's institutions and the resolve of its leaders to uphold democratic principles. While the truth behind the allegations remains contested, the event emphasized the importance of vigilance and transparency in safeguarding Nigeria's hard-earned democracy. Nigeria's history of coups paints a picture of a nation grappling with its identity, struggling to balance power, unity, and progress. From the idealistic aspirations of the January 15, 1966 coup to the paranoia and betrayals of the 2003 alleged coup plot, these events have shaped the trajectory of Africa's most populous nation. The coups were not merely changes in government, they were reflections of the deep-seated issues Nigeria faced: ethnic divisions, corruption, economic mismanagement, and the tension between civilian and military authority. Nigeria's journey from a coup-plagued state to a democratic republic has been far from smooth. Yet, the resilience of its people stands as a testament to the enduring spirit of the nation. While the specter of coups remains a cautionary tale, it also serves as a reminder of the sacrifices made to preserve Nigeria's sovereignty and democracy. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Nigeria's tumultuous political history. If you found this enlightening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss an episode of History at Dawn. Stay tuned for more untold truths you won't find in school. Together, let's uncover the hidden